Hello. I'm just kind of getting some stuff set up here. I am really excited to, let's see. Oh, shoot. I gotta pop out this chat. Oh my gosh. Okay, cool. Let's put this in Zen mode. Just getting a couple things, last minute things set up. And we'll start in just a minute. Now, I didn't really like advertise this because I'm actually like, I've been super nervous about doing a live stream again because it's been a minute. I think the last one of these I did was in May. And every time I was like, you know what, I'm going to do another one of those, I talked myself out of it because it's just super nerve wracking. So I'm hoping to get myself back in the habit of doing these because they're super fun for me, and I get to learn. I get to learn a lot. Um, so I wanted to talk about what this whole thing is about today. Probably spend about 45 minutes, and the goal is to just work through some new material that I have on React Suspense and React Cache. Now, these are super experimental. Here, actually, I set up a different scene. Oh, look. Hey, it's my whole face. Now, these are super experimental, and I am trying to figure out how best to talk about them right now because I have a workshop in a couple weeks with Egghead, and that's going to be fun. But eventually, this is going to become a course. So once all of these things are stabilized, I'm really hoping to make this a course that you can learn everything that you need to know about how Suspense changes your applications, changes your application structure, all that kind of stuff. So that's where today comes in. It's not fully fleshed out, and that's why I didn't really like make a big deal about doing this live stream. But you'll be able to see kind of like where it's at, and if you have any feedback or criticisms, I'd love to hear that. So maybe you don't see this live, maybe you see it later after it kind of gets like processed and put on my YouTube channel. That's great. Please let me know what you think. If there was anything that was confusing to you, anything that I didn't do a good job explaining, or if you've been explaining it to people and you have a better way, I'd love to hear all that stuff. So yeah, let's get into it. Is it? It's not quite noon. Um, just in case anyone had like was waiting, I'll probably wait a second. So I'll talk about like what this I guess a couple things that you need to know. So first of all, I guess if you wanted to follow along, you can get this code sandbox here. I'll paste that over here in chat so you can copy paste it. It is codesandbox.io/s/suspense workshop dash ch like Chan x1d, one dimensional. I'm a one-dimensional Chan, apparently. And the way this thing is set up, let's see, let's open this up, put that back in full screen. There are a couple like steps that I'd gone through, and those culminated in these lesson steps that I have right now, which I'll be kind of like ironing out as we go through this. Now I have included in here a build of React Cache. Now, the reason that's important is because right now the build of React Cache that's on npm doesn't work with the latest React. So right now I'm on like React 16.8.6. I'm not sure exactly what the latest is. I forked this from a previous project, but React Cache doesn't work. It has some like additional expectations, and you're gonna have to build a version of this on your own. Oh, hey, Bill, welcome. Thanks for being here. I'm excited to have you. I'm glad that I'm not just doing this alone. If you have any questions or things that don't seem very clear, please let me know. So React Cache, I have a copy of it in here. It was built from React Master, or I think I copied it from somebody else. But it's a version that works. Now, if you're going to play around with React Cache, you can either fork this project, or you can build React on your own. Now that might feel a little bit daunting, and actually later today I want to make a video on Egghead talking about how to build React from master. So if you're an Egghead subscriber, you can hopefully get that pretty soon. So what are we going to cover today? So I have the local cache. We're going to use this index file. I have the pretty standard setup: React DOM, React scripts, and then I added this one called sleep promise. And you'll see why that's important later. It's really just for demonstration. You probably wouldn't need this in a normal project. So here we go. What do we have in this index file? Well, from the top, we have just our regular imports, all of the things that we're going to be covering in this 45 minutes to an hour. And let's see. We have one fetch. It's just kind of standalone. It's totally outside of our application. And we have an application that just spits out some text. Actually, I can kill this because we're not using any of those styles. And it just says Pokemon go here. So eventually the Pokemon are going to get displayed there. But right now we're in two separate lands. We have our fetch that's happening. We log that out. We see all the Pokemon that we're getting from this endpoint. So it works. But then how do we connect this data to our application? That's the big question that we're trying to solve here today. And there's plenty of ways to do that. There's plenty of libraries that would allow you to do that. But today I want to show you how we start thinking about interacting with data with React Suspense. So first things first, I'm going to close this shelf up right now because we won't need that. Let's see. So we're going to go through this first section here. Now, what we need to do is we need a bridge that's going to communicate like when this data has actually been retrieved. And oh shoot, oh my gosh, I did all that and I was still showing you my face. Unbelievable. I'm sorry. So one more time then. This app is pretty simple. It just has headers on the top to import React DOM, and then, oh my gosh, a fetch, which is just logging out our results here, and an app that's rendering here. And our goal is to marry these two using Suspense. Can't believe I did that. Okay, cool. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to import, let's see, we're going to import from React Cache. Now, because React Cache is experimental, so experimental that we had to build it on our own from source, we're going to import unstable create root as create. Oh, no, that's not what we wanted. Unstable create cache as create cache. Now, anytime I'm working with some type of unstable API, like the unstable create cache API, I always like to alias it using this as syntax in the for import. And one of the reasons that is because now I can use create cache anywhere that I would have used unstable create cache. And when that actually becomes stable, all I have to do is delete that and I'm off to the races. So that's a nice little tip on how you can use modules. Yeah, you're imagining the code. Yep. Sorry about that. This is I'm like so bad at like actually like transitions and live streaming. So I gotta get better at that. So let's see. Now this isn't like I said, we're building this. So I made my own React cache. So that's the one that we're gonna use. Okay, everything works now. Great. Hallelujah. So what are the steps that we need to do now? Well, wow, I'm all over the place. Sorry, this is so, we can't actually use these in production, or I can't. I don't have like a lot of muscle memory built up around this. We're gonna create a resource. not a cache. So we're importing in unstable create resource as create resource from React cache. Let's get into it. So from there, we want to create a resource, and we're going to talk in just a couple minutes about what a resource is. I'm going to show you what that actually means. But for now, we just want to hook these things up. So first step is going to be function Pokemon. I'm going to call this a Pokemon collection resource because it's going to have the collection of all of our Pokemons that we can use. Pokemon, not Pokemons. All the Pokemon that we can use. And what that's going to look like is, actually we're going to change this to let, and we're going to use create resource. And we're going to give it a function, what it needs to do when we want to collect this resource. And in that, we're going to wrap our fetch. Now, I'm not going to grab that last part because that is logging out the results, which we don't need to do. And with that, we have created a Pokemon collection resource. Nice and easy. So all we've done is we've wrapped this fetch, this promise inside of a create resource. And that is how we're going to be able to start connecting the pieces between the data and React. So resource, first thing you need to do. Now resources have a function that we can call on them called read. Say, hey, I want to read data from this resource. Now we can render that out like we would do anything else. We would use these curly braces to interpolate JSX, say Pokemon collection resource dot read. And the shape of the data from this is in results. So I'm just going to call results right there. We'll map over this, and then for each Pokemon, we will spit out a div. And that will have the Pokemon name. Okay, cool. Now, our app doesn't work right now, but it gives us a helpful message. So let's say app suspended while rendering. That's cool. That's a new one we haven't seen before. But there was no fallback UI specified. Okay, cool. And then it tells us how to fix that. So we need to add a suspense component with a fallback higher up in the tree to provide a loading indicator or placeholder display. Error messages on point. Love it. So we can do that. So I'm going to use property access syntax here. You could destructure the suspense component out of our React import if you wanted to, but I'm just going to stay down here and use it like this. App suspended while rendering, so it's still the same error. And so we're going to put that other part, that fallback here, loading. Now, we've done everything it asked, but it's still giving us this error. So why is that? Well, it turns out that just like error boundaries, these resources and the suspense component actually need to be separated by a component boundary. So we can't just have like React suspense and then have it just render the data itself. We actually need to pull that out into a component. So I'm just going to cut that, and I'm going to create a new component and see if this fixes our problem. We'll call this Pokemon list. And we'll define that up here, function Pokemon list. And we'll return a React fragment. Oops. Cool. So what's our problem now? Pokemon not defined. Now that error went away, but we're not rendering our Pokemon, so something is wacky. Oh, spelling. Oops. Oh my word. sometimes Code Sandbox is a little bit different than my regular VS Code environment, and that screws me up. Okay, cool. So now the error goes away and we have everything that we need, which is great. So these Pokemon, just to recap, we were fetching them. That always worked. That's where we started. And in order to kind of hook them up to Suspense, we needed to wrap them up in a resource. Okay, to do that, we just import create resource from React cache, and we give it a function and say, hey, we want to read from this source. So fetch this data from here. And then from there, we wrapped our whole thing in Suspense. We provided a fallback and created a component boundary for our Pokemon list. Now, when we had it in here directly, that didn't work. We needed to have some type of like component so that they could be like separated in the tree. I don't actually fully understand why that is, but it is super important. So yes, thank you, Lucas. I appreciate it. There's a little bit of a delay with the live stream, so thank you for getting that to me. Let's see. Okay, cool. So that's really that's what we got so far. So that is the whole first part of it. And now that we've got that, everything's kind of easy street from here on out. But those are three pieces that you're always going to need. You're going to need a resource. You're going to need to wrap that in a Suspense component with a provided fallback. And then there's going to need to be a component boundary. If you have all those things in place, you are good to go. Now, what I want to show you next is how this interacts with errors. At least I think that's what I want to show you next. Yes, I'm actually going to skip this part. We can get back to it if we have a little bit more time, but I'm going to keep laser focused on the Suspense stuff. So what we're going to do first is we're going to break this endpoint and see what happens. So I'm just going to add an X to the URL. I think it's, there we go. Yeah, that's what I need to do. Okay, so we get this big, bold browser error, or I don't know. We get this big, bold error, right? And it says failed to fetch. Now, we don't actually, a user wouldn't really see this because it's in like create React app and this kind of stuff gets pulled out in the production builds. But we don't want it to just fail, right, for our users. And for that, we use an error boundary. Now, I am going to show you what I do every time I need a React error boundary. I just Google React error boundaries. That takes me to the React docs. And they have this beautiful copy pastable example right here for you. So if you don't have one already in your application, you can just copy and paste this one. It's terrific. And we're going to do this. We're just going to copy and paste that code wholesale. And this creates an error boundary component. Now, the only thing you need to know is that there is this component did catch. If there is an error, it has this log error to my service function. It calls that. And since we don't have that defined, if you had a service like, what was it, Sentry or Bugsnag, you could log it to those. Since we don't have one set up, I'm just going to console.log this. So that'll be our error reporting service right now. Now, what we need to do is actually use our error boundary. And I'm going to put that inside of our application. Now, you might be tempted to put it in here, and I do not recommend that. I always recommend that you put all these things as high up as possible. Don't try to abstract around your like React and Suspense stuff. I'll show you some tricks for like how to do that later. But for now, I just want to put this as close to the top level of the app as possible. So error boundary. Right there, going to copy that, whoops. Okay, so now we've pulled that out, we've surrounded that with an error boundary, and we see something really cool happen now. Just by adding that component, now we're catching that error. So it's not getting all the way to the top where it's just exploding everything. We've caught it, and now we can do whatever we want with it. Now we have this right here. That's a fine error message, but it might be nice to customize that. So I'm going to say like, yeah, that's fine. We'll have that as the default. But also, if there's a this.props.fallback, I'm just borrowing that because that's the language that Suspense uses, then we'll prioritize that. So, oh my word. Okay, so we're gonna say on here, fallback, and we'll say couldn't catch them all. Cool. Now this fallback can be just a string. It can be any like renderable thing, or we could actually make this a component. So that was like nice and big as like an H1. So we'll do that. H1. Cool. Couldn't catch them all. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. Okay, so we have our list that's going to render. If it doesn't, while it's waiting, it's going to show this loading stage, and then if something breaks, well, it's going to say couldn't catch them all. So let's fix our endpoint, and whoop. There we go. So we fixed our endpoint, and now we are fetching these Pokemon. They're rendering delightfully. Let's see, what did I want to do? Okay, so customize our error. We did all that stuff. That's great. Okay, so we can see that everything's working the way that it's supposed to. But it's hard for us to really see that loading state. It does happen. Key prop stuff. I'm gonna hide that for now. It does happen. You can see it briefly. You might not even be able to see it on the stream because it happens so fast. So this is where that sleep function comes into play. Just for demonstration, so you can see all this stuff coming together. I want to import this sleep function from sleep promise, and I'm going to just kind of artificially add a delay. So once we get our return, I'm going to sleep for another 250 milliseconds. Let's do 300. Okay, so you should be able to see now that there's a slightly longer delay that happens. Loading shows up immediately, and then once that promise resolves, then all of the other stuff comes in. So cool. So where do we go from there? Well, now we have an opportunity to talk about what a resource does. We have both the success state, the loading state, or all three of the success state, the loading state, and an error state. And that is really what a resource controls. So in order to show you what that does, I'm actually going to make my own create resource. So we're going to comment this out for a little bit. And let's see. So we're going to make a function because this is called as a function called create resource. And that is going to take a promise, or we'll call this a thenable, something that you can call then on. And what it does from there is pretty simple. It's going to return, let's see, what are we going to do? Return a object that has a read function on it. Oops. Okay. Now, what that read function is going to do is, let's see. So yeah, so you can see we have we're calling a resource. We're calling that read function, which returns the results. Okay, so right now we have, so we can throw an error, and that's going to get us into our error state. That's one of the things that a resource does, is that if something went wrong, it's going to throw an error and then boom. Now, in order to see like that we're actually controlling this error, so like by default, I think it throws a type error. Yep, there's a type error by default, and you can see that when I throw this error, it is changing it to just error. So if I call this like a resource error, I don't know, I think I might have to make a new error, but anyway, It defaults to reference error. I don't know. Anyway, we can. That's one of the things that a resource does, is that when the promise fails, it's going to throw an error, and that'll get caught by our error boundary. Okay, so that's one of the first things it does. Now, if it's in a loading state, it's going to throw that promise. And that's how we know that it's loading. We know that the promise is unresolved, and so it's going to throw that promise and say like, hey, this thing isn't, we don't actually have this data yet, so just show the fallback state until we get it. Okay, and then finally, it's going to return, once that promise resolves, we're going to return the result. In this case, it looks something like this, with a Pokemon inside, with the name of Bulbasaur. Oh, that's not right. There we go. Let's see, result. There we go. Okay. So in the case that when it's resolved, it actually is just going to return whatever the result of that promise is. So in our case, it is an object with results with an array with Pokemon inside of it. Now, those are the three things that it does. So when you start, it's going to, oops, let's see. So when Suspense starts, it's going to throw this promise that's kind of like, waiting to be resolved. You're just going to see your loading state, and then it's going to either return all the results, which just returns the results and renders that out as you expect, or it's going to throw an error, which you will catch and then display that error. So those are the things that create resource controls. Those are the outputs of create resource. Now, inside, there's actually a ton of magic that's going to happen around watching those promises for their resolution and actually like connecting up to like scheduling events for the React runtime, all this stuff that you really don't need to think about anymore. And that's the beauty of Suspense, is that you might have to think about it in resolving those promises yourself or using a library to do that for you. And in this case, Suspense, libraries are going to start depending a little bit more on Suspense and kind of copying this create resource model to do exactly that, which gives us this really nice API where we just have the Pokemon list, which reads from a resource, and we don't have to hook up all of that, like waiting, not sure when the data is going to come in, what do we show? We just give a fallback. It's awesome. So anyway, I hope that you understand a little bit at a high level about what these resources are going to do. So now that we've done that, we can create, we can kill that. We would jump back up, re-import that. Let's see. So yeah, we did all that. Cool. Perfect. Probably shouldn't be deleting all of my notes, but just to save space. So what do we do after that? Now, you'll notice that no matter what, we're always, let's see, what time is it? 12:22. Perfect. Oh, we're sailing along. If you have questions, let me know, because it looks like I might actually have time to cover those questions. So let's see. So we're sailing along. How do we do this now? So concurrent mode. Now you'll notice that loading happens immediately, right away. And the reason that is because while we're using our Suspense component, we're not actually opting into the full concurrent mode that's kind of been being tested in React. So what do we do to start opting into that? How do we get control of when that loading actually shows? We do that by importing something else from React DOM. Now, you've seen this for forever. React DOM.render. That's the way we've been attaching React apps to the DOM for as long as I've been writing React. Now, that has the potential to change. And that will be with the introduction of, let's see, create root. Now, this is also an unstable API, so create root as, we're going to alias that. And the API is slightly different. I'm going to comment this out because we will probably use that again later. It's going to look like this. Create root. And we're going to use the root element. And then we're going to render our app to it. So what used to be 2 arguments is now a function that then, you're going to call this function on your root, and then you're going to call render on the return of that with the application that you want to render. So there we are. So let's render this again and see what happens. Okay, so this is interesting. Immediately, just by changing that thing, now we don't see the loading at all. Now, I want to make sure that you know that this is like intentional and not just like a blip or an accident. So I'm going to change this to a whole second. And you can see that when we sleep that for a second, it still does nothing. So how do we now show our loading state now that this concurrent thing is kind of just waiting until the data is loaded? Great question. We have another API available on our Suspense component called max duration. And what max duration does is it allows us to specify how much time we're willing to wait before showing the loading state. Now, why is this important? The school of thought is that, or research suggests that somewhere around 100 milliseconds, people are able to, or 300 milliseconds, people start perceiving a delay. But before that, they don't really perceive a delay. So when we just throw up a loading thing right away, that actually makes it feel longer because we immediately see, oh, we're waiting for data, and then we get the data. So even if that happens really fast, like if it happens in like 100 milliseconds, well, it felt longer than if we didn't see anything at all. So what max duration does is it allows us to communicate in our UIs. Look, if it's less than 100 milliseconds, like don't even show the thing, don't show the loading state at all, because like I'd rather just them not know that we're loading data and then just see data. But if it's longer than that, then yeah, maybe we should show the loading state. So I'm going to set this to 0, which is the default for this sync style, the old style, the current style of rendering React apps. So max duration. Okay, so in order to get back to what we had with this, the default in sync mode is that max duration is 0. We don't wait at all. So let's start bumping that up. So we're waiting for, it's taking a second to get that whole request. So if we don't want to see a loading state at all, we set it to a second. If we were to say, you know what, it's appropriate for someone to have to wait 100 milliseconds before seeing a loader, then we can put 100 in there, and we'll see that we don't see anything for a brief period of time, then we see loading for the duration of the time that it takes to resolve that request. So that's where max duration comes in. That's where this new kind of like synchronous, I don't even know. I'm not even going to pretend that I know what I'm talking about here. But that's where it hits you in practice. Now I think this isn't actually going to work because, yeah, they're going to resolve at the same time. If I had another request going, then I would be, oops. Actually, let's see. Yeah, let's just do another request. Okay, so it'll give us a chance to kind of cover everything that we learned. So we have that. We're going to actually collect a Pokemon, create resource. As this, we're going to take the ID and add that to the end. Cool. Let's also make that take a second. Sure, why not? So create resource. We're going to render a Pokemon. Cool. Let's actually make that component. So function Pokemon. This one we'll have to take props for because we'll need the ID. We're going to return a React fragment. My typing is atrocious, as always. And then we're going to do that same thing. So we'll do Pokemon. Oh, wait, I called this one Pokemon. Pokemon resource. We're going to take our Pokemon resource. We're going to read from our cache. Take the, let's see. I need to see what that data actually looks like. Pokemon of 1. Oof. Okay, cool. It is an object, and then it also has a name. We'll just grab that name. I'll leave this open for now. Let's see. Read name. Okay, let's see. Let's put this as a sibling at first. This is going to be Pokemon. Oh. Props.id. Okay, cool. We can see that at the bottom here. So I'm actually going to change this to an H1. Okay, cool. And we can see that if I were to change this to 2, it would be Ivysaur, 3, Venusaur. Cool. So we can see that those are separate now. We're making 2 separate requests, but we're rendering them in this same suspense component. So let's tinker around with this and see what happens. So right now, both of those requests are in the same suspense component. So we have a max duration of 100 milliseconds before we show a loader, and then both of those will display. So what happens if we take this outside of our suspense component? Well, we're going to get an error, and that's because we need to wrap that in another suspense component. Let's see what happens now. Okay, cool. So now we have 2 loaders. That's fine. And let's say that we want to change. Let's say that we're willing to wait 100 milliseconds for this one. I'm actually going to put, 100 milliseconds for this one. But we know that this one's maybe like a slightly slower endpoint. So we're actually going to wait 500 milliseconds for that one. Let's do this. Come on. Didn't work. Okay, let's change this. So loading. Let's put this in a div too. Just so we can see it on different lines. Loading Pokemon. Okay. Cool. So let's see. So we have max duration of that one. And actually take these out so we can kind of start over. So the whole thing is going to, now we don't see any loading state. It just kind of like waits until both of them are ready and does its thing. So let's wrap that in another React suspense. We'll call this loading your page. Let's make it more Pokemon themed. Gotta catch 'em all. Okay, now we don't see that, but we need to, and that's because we need to set a max duration. So let's say right off the bat, I want to see that. Gotta catch 'em all. What the fuck? Oh, sorry. My bad. My bad. All right, so obviously I didn't rehearse this part of it, so I'm kind of stumbling all over myself. Okay, cool. Let's separate one of these. React.suspense. I'm gonna start from the other side. It's been a while since I've done this. I apologize. Whoops. 100 milliseconds. All right. Well, it's obvious that I don't remember how to do this part yet. What a bummer. I thought I had it all under control. I don't. So let's ditch that for now. I was so close. I was so close. Am I spelling everything right? I thought that is exactly what I had done in previous iterations of this, but it's possible that my memory is failing me. Very possible, in fact. Let's go back to the code that we had before, which is just spitting out this list. One of the things that I wanted to demonstrate in terms of the modularizing this code, cool. So we did that. One of the things I want to demonstrate in terms of modularizing all of this code is how, instead of wrapping this whole thing up into like a big suspensey error caught component for rendering a list of Pokemon, how do I keep this separate while still abstracting certain things? And that is where I like to see extracting around these components. So let's say we have this fallback. I'd like to see something like, let's see, Pokemon collection error. Okay, and then we just define that function error. Cool. Now, we're not getting into that error state, so let's force it. Couldn't catch them all. Great. Okay. So cool. So we have now an error component. And then let's go into this one. So right here, we're going to be Pokemon. Pokemon list fallback, we'll call it that. Okay, and then we'll define that function Pokemon list fallback. Paste that in. Okay, cool. So now all that stuff, now we have this abstracted out into components, but we're not kind of like making some big massive component. We're always going to compose these together so that we can have full control over kind of our max durations as we need to modify those and tweak those to have this display the way that we want to our consumers of our application. So how I would modularize that, let me just make a new file and we'll call this, let's see, Pokemon. Okay, and I'm going to effectively pull out a bunch of stuff here. So we'll pull out the resource. And I'll probably pull off that. Export collection resource. Let's see, we're going to need to import both of these actually. Let's see, so we'll import those. We're going to export this as collection resource, and then from this side we will import collection resource as Pokemon collection resource from Pokemon. Cool. That works. Now, ultimately, we don't even really need to, if we don't want to, we don't have to export the resource at all. We could just export the components. So let's take the list component. That's the component that actually displays the list. And let's pull that definition out and paste that here. And actually make the resource private. So let's see. So this is going to call collection resource. Because we're using React fragment, we need to import React from React. Perfect. And now what we'll do is we will pull Pokemon list as Pokemon list. We'll change this to list as it's namespaced by the module, and that still works. So this is actually kind of like a fun way to, so we have this resource. Maybe we don't want everybody using this resource. We just want them to consume the list component, in which case we can keep this implementation private, and then, you know, just have it exposed through the component that reads it. So that's pretty cool. Let's see, we have these. I'm actually just going to delete these. So since I couldn't get them to work, but we also have our Pokemon collection error and our Pokemon, let's see, Pokemon list fallback. So let's delete those. We're going to import them. Pokemon collection error and Pokemon list fallback. Not exactly sure why it's still working. There we go. That's more like it. And then we'll export those from our module and see those kind of come back online. And then again, because these are namespaced, I would probably change this to collection error and list fallback. Cool. Awesome. So that's how that works, and now we just kind of have our error boundary, which I would absolutely move into a more generic spot. Typically, you only need one of these per app, especially if it's customized in a way that you can provide a custom error. So I would pull that out, and really in this file, you're really just going to have the app and the imports, which is really, really, really neat. So I think that's going to be it. We did 43 minutes. I do apologize for not being able to demonstrate the suspense much better and how you can separate children. That is my bad. I didn't really get to that. I didn't get to a place where. I didn't get to a place where I had rehearsed that from the previous times that I had gone through this. So maybe that changed a little bit, and my expectations were off. But yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help. In the eventual workshop that's going to happen next week on the 16th with Egghead, I will go further, much further into kind of how this affects some of the other parts of building an application, kind of how we modularize things, how this kind of interacts with context and hooks and all that kind of stuff. But for today, I just wanted to kind of reacquaint myself and kind of like work with you on learning how to do this suspense stuff just by itself. So if you have any feedback for me, please let me know. Thank you for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'm gonna stick around for a couple minutes if you have any questions or feedback for me. Let's see. Actually, what I'm gonna do, pull something up real quick. So I have some. I'm doing the course. If you want to join in for the course where we actually build this out, it has styles. It has all that kind of stuff. Let me give you some links. Sorry, I gotta pull it up on Slack real quick. Whoop. Let's see. Oh, looks like it's almost sold out. So, anyway, if you want to, I have a special link for just for you, for my friends here. It'll get you 49. You can get in the workshop for 49 bucks. It's just for people who are following me. It's a way for me to be able to thank you for kind of hanging in there with me. And yeah, so it's usually, I think it's 200 bucks. It's almost sold out. You can get it for 49 bucks, and we're going to cover this and much, much more. I am really grateful for your time today. Oh, thanks, Bill. I love the podcast. The podcast is like the joy of my life. I get to talk with like the coolest people and just kind of hopefully deliver some like inspiration for you to just realize that like all these people just kind of had an idea and started and they things just kind of unfolded for them. It's been super super fun. So I hope it's inspirational at times to see just how easy it can be to put an idea, scratch your own itch, put an idea in the world, and start meeting cool people from it. So that's it. Thanks so much for being here. You're great. Uh, and I look forward to seeing you maybe in the workshop. I'll probably do this again next week because obviously I have a little bit of work to do before I can teach it well. So anyway, thanks for being here. I love you. You're great. Now I just gotta find that thing. How do I stop the stream? All right, bye. See ya.